So we'll share my screen again. I hope you can hear me. In any case, you can stop me through the chat. Okay. So this webinar is the presentation of a work done for dyslexic students in the previous years. This work is now in this moment that we are going under particular period in which all schools are facing online learning, remote learning. I think it is important to give some hints for the students who can have more difficulties in these periods, because there were students which were supported in a particular way during our class lessons. And so it is important to promote their learning, to support them in some way. And I have to say that digital tools are really a good opportunity for these kind of students. I will introduce my study on this approach based on digital tools for um, dyslexic students, but when I talk about dyslexic, I talk about other kind of specific learning disorders. And I will start from the process that I used to follow at school, and then I will show some change that has been due to this change of conditions in school and in our lives. So what is dyslexia? This is important to say. The experience that I'm reporting is an experience carried on in an Italian school. In particular, the school where I work is located in a really disadvantaged context in southern Italy, Sicily. Is a small comprehensive institute near Palermo, which is the chief town of Sicily, and the social context is really disadvantaged. There is a lot of unemployment and low cultural conditions, and there is also a lot of migration towards outside, and in particular towards also outer countries, like out of Europe too. In Italy, dyslexia is considered as a part of a wider frame of learning disorders affecting the population. In dyslexia, we can also comprehend dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dysorthography, but also other kind of learning disorders. Dyslexia is a real problem, is a problem which affects the acquisition of reading and writing of many individuals, and whose effect may be worsened by an inadequate education at school. We have to assume that dyslexia, the attention dyslexia, is really recent. Is not more than 50 years that students with this kind of problems were treated as a necessary to particular care. Nowadays, studies say that the percentage of students affected by these disorders in Italy is estimated around the 5% of the world school population, and this percentage is growing because of the tests which have been implemented during these years. This data is referred to last national survey, which is related to 5 years ago, and is the data we are assuming as basis of our process of experimentation in school. The school where we carried on this project is called Istituto Comprensivo La Valanza Baronessa di Carini and is located in Sicily. We have a long experience in this field because we have a lot of problems with students with disadvantages, cultural disadvantages, learning disadvantages. In particular, dyslexic students face strong troubles, in particular with second language learning. And as I teach English as a second language, for me it was mandatory to try to discover and to cope with different methodologies in order to support their process of learning. What I decided, and it is a strategy which I applied also with the students with other kind of problems like students with disabilities, and is a strategy which is based on digital tools. And I have to say, I have to admit that I've been experiencing this kind of methodologies for 8 years, at least 8 years. It has been proven to be very successful in most cases. Our school applied in 2017 in an Erasmus project, K201, called the Distance Supporting Dyslexic Individual in Transition from Primary to Lower Secondary School. This project focused in particular on the passage of the students which were affected by dyslexia or suspected as dyslexic students from primary school to lower secondary school, which is a complex passage for children in any case, and in this case could be also more tough than usual. In fact, if not recognized in time and not provided with effective support, dyslexia can be a really tough problem for students. In fact, it can cause academic failure, and the failure school affects their self-esteem, their motivation, and it also leads to early leaving from school. Moreover, what was more difficult for these kind of students was the acquisition of a second language, because writing and reading was really difficult for them in their mother tongue. So the passage from mother tongue to foreign language could be also more difficult. And it could be really challenging and frustrating. And so what is important in this kind of students not to lose their motivation. So it is extremely important for trainers, for teachers, for all the person around these kind of students that the support and the psychological support and the care for their needs is really important. We decided to focus our attention on dyslexic students in a particular way, separating the dyslexic students from the class and engaging them in activities apart from the classes in order to fill their gaps, not only for this reason, but also to provide them a more comfortable environment in which they were all them at the same level, and so they have no problems to feel different from the others. In particular, we had two students in which whom we focused our attention, who had to pass their exams at the end of the school years from low secondary to high secondary school, and it was important to provide for them a certain context to allow them to fill the gap within the class. What we did is that we separated them during the class lessons, and we put them in another environment with two teachers to support them, and they were allowed to use their smartphone for educational activities. So they could Google contents, they could use translator for second language acquisition, they could also use calculator because we involved them also in math supporting project. The tasks that the team of the teachers proposed were really similar to the curricular ones the other in classes were attending, but were just a little bit simplified, and they were provided really help to accomplish their task by the teachers, also working in pairs or working in groups in order to increase motivation and self-esteem. and the things we were doing, the things before lockdown. This is the basic room where we lead the students. They were allowed to use digital devices, and they used mostly the media room, and the groups were made up of 4 students. So there were tables where they could sit together, they could work together within another context, and using the computers and supported by the teachers. Students in small groups, they not only use their smartphones, as you can see in the pictures, but they use a lot of maps, diagrams, charts that we were providing to them in order not to lose the confidence with the writing skills. Because what is tough is to write. So when you provide grid, charts, and maps, it is just a little bit easier for this kind of students to follow the topic. This is instead an activity in this class that they all did together because it was an activity which was accessible to everyone. The digital tools were useful. This is a Kahoot. I think it's very common nowadays to use Kahoot. We used before and we're using it now that we are working online. And the digital tools provided a really effective utility for them because writing is a really difficult performance for dyslexic and dysgraphic students. And their faulty orthography could also affect the expression of their thought and the accomplishment of their task. So they can have confusion because they have a wrong recognition of phonemes. And so when they try to reproduce the oral language to written language, it can be just confused. And so they do not understand what they're doing. So the use of digital documents and the digital writing software and also the orthography, the correction of orthography, which is automatic, for example, in the Word documents, and gave them the possibility to cope with their difficulties and to follow the path. But what really was important was an activity that they could do all together was quizzes such as Kahoot, which is an interactive platform with closed answers, and also matching exercise and fill in the gap text supports by large fonts, because it's important to use large fonts, in particular the Verdana fonts. And it is more important also to use visualization, visual activities. The use of digital tools after the lockdown has been proved very effective for these students, which were really used to this kind of path. They were used to use digital tools, digital devices, their smartphones, laptops during normal presence school, and they were prepared to use these kind of tools after lockdown. What is important that this kind of the use of these tools foster the self-confidence, and it is also evident also that after the lockdown that the lesson time cannot be the same of classroom lessons, and it is important because for these students the attention time is very thin. So to have the possibility to have a shorter lesson, and in this particular moment we have to do something like this. It is make them feel less different from the others. In a certain way, we're applying more generally this approach to the whole class, because not only the online learning is based a lot on digital tools. Some examples can be seen at this link, in which we used a lot Learning Apps, which is another software. And the screenshot of these learning apps are these are created because what is important is that the materials for the students, for dyslexic students, but for students in general, is better to create, to be created by the teacher, because the teacher knows exactly what kind of materials can be adapted to the students with special particular needs. So these are three examples taken from the learning apps, which were the link of the previous slide. In these examples, I tried to cope with the difficulties that the students can have in writing and reading using visualization. This is a matching, like a memory game, but not also with the word, so the orthography, but also with the audio, in order that they can match audio and figure, but also word and figure, and it is very important for all the students, but in particular for students who have some problems with writing and reading. And this other instead was image and sounds to the elements. So there was an audio and also word, and the image and the word about the weather. And this is where is it? And this instead is the hangman, which was made up by an audio to listen and to match with the letters, and so it was very useful for students, in particular for students who have this kind of writing and reading difficulties. The students last year, and this year they are not, but were led to online comprehension tests in English as a second language in order to gain the right experience to attend the national skills tests that this year are not compulsory any longer for taking their school diploma. These tests, mother tongue, math, and English skills were all computer-based tests, and we tried to prepare students through the use of other tools, like you can see this was the filling in the gaps, listening to a text, in this case a song, and reading the word on the wall, because it was projected on the wall. Digital tools are really a strong support for students. In fact, they support dyslexic individuals as writing and reading are made easier, and orthographic support is all they need. And this is, of course, is a good starting point for students with specific learning disorders. And it is very interesting to say that this kind of methodology that we applied as necessary for students with this kind of disorders is now applicable to all our students through online distance learning. And this is a way in which inclusion can work, can still work, because we have to remember that any form of education is to be inclusive. What can be done more in this particular moment is also to involve this kind of students in small groups, even when we have to do video conference, video lessons, because sometimes when they are in bigger groups, they can feel lost. So it is really important also to dedicate some extra time to them, and to use more digital tools that it can be possible. And in particular, if we try also to give a written task to our students, it is important for dyslexic students to give them an application in which they can fill, in which they can write with a support, with a support. It also can be useful a text-to-speech word, or they can also record their feelings, their topics, and then also in order to give us an oral neural task in the place of a written task. And what is more successful is that one of the one of the biggest issue of a dyslexic student is the fact that the comparison with the others is really tough for him or for her. And so in this kind of virtual classes can be just like a shield where they can protect themselves and to be involved in the activity of classes because they have a filter and they have a support next to them who can help them with their difficulties. And so in this case, for them, online learning can be more useful if we compare it to normal classes. And in particular because reading aloud for them is a really tough work, and usually if they in a class context where they have the eyes of the school mates in front of them, it can be really tough. In this case we can supply with other kind of activities in which they are really involved. So there are some references about this project, in which we made two guides. We produced two guides, one for teachers, one for students. Um, there are some publication issue that you can see if you want to deepen the topic. Thanks for your attention.